For years, we've heard Republicans thumping podiums, swearing up and down that they would rip the lid off the Epstein files, that they would show America the truth. Trump's own son demanded, "Show us all the Epstein client list right now." Pam Bundy claimed the list was sitting on her desk. Cash Patel promised to reveal the full weight of what happened. And finally, after all the grandstanding, all the cable news appearances, all the tweets, they had their moment. A single, simple vote to release the files. To let the public see who was involved in one of the largest organized child trafficking rings in modern history. They didn't just fail. They refused. Nearly every Republican who spent years shouting for transparency turned around and voted no. Think about that. They said they were protecting children. They said they would hold predators accountable. And when the cameras weren't rolling, when it actually mattered, they chose to keep the truth locked away.
The truth is, this was never about justice. It was about leverage, about power, about keeping the secrets that let them pull the strings. If you ever needed proof that the Epstein scandal was a bipartisan cancer infecting every level of government, here it is, in broad daylight, in the congressional record. No more excuses, no more illusions, because you can either protect powerful men or you can stand with the victims, but you cannot do both.
Some stories are so depraved, so dark, that your first instinct is to dismiss them as fiction. The saga of Jeffrey Epstein belongs in that category. A financier who was never truly a financier, a sex trafficker masquerading as a philanthropist, and ultimately a fixer whose real currency was secrets about the rich and powerful. But the most disturbing part is not merely Epstein's personal crimes. It is the system that enabled him, protected him, and to this day, shields the identities of those who shared in or benefited from his abuse. For years, politicians and pundits thundered on television, demanding that the Epstein client list be released. They promised us, regular citizens, that finally, we would see who was complicit. They said justice was coming. They said the swamp would be drained. Yet when these same voices gained the power to deliver, they retreated behind closed doors and offered a parade of excuses. As an ordinary American, I find that betrayal infuriating, because it is proof that the machinery of accountability was never designed to protect the public or the victims. It was designed to protect them. Stripping away the illusions about Epstein is the first step. He cultivated the image of a brilliant billionaire investor, managing vast fortunes from the Upper East Side. But if you examine court filings, interviews with former employees, tax records, and investigative reporting, you find something closer to a confidence man who exploited connections to ingratiate himself with influential figures. The bulk of his wealth was attributed to his relationship with Les Wexner, the founder of L Brands, who allowed Epstein to exercise extraordinary control over his finances and real estate holdings, arrangements that remain opaque to this day. The New York Times documented how Wexner handed Epstein the keys to multiple properties, transferred tens of millions of dollars, and never satisfactorily explained why. Behind that polished facade, Epstein ran what federal prosecutors described as a vast network of underage girls recruited to engage in sex acts. The victims were as young as 14. They were lured with promises of modeling contracts or easy cash for massages. What made Epstein different from a garden-variety predator was that he meticulously documented everything: hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, guest logs, flight manifests, and coded ledgers, tools that could be used to compromise the powerful. When he was first caught in Florida in 2008, despite overwhelming evidence, Epstein secured a plea deal so favorable it defied comprehension. 13 months in a private wing of the Palm Beach jail, with daily work release privileges to spend 12 hours in his office. As the Miami Herald's 2018 investigation, Perversion of Justice, revealed, the victims were never told about the deal, which violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act. The lesson was unmistakable. If you are rich enough, if you have the right secrets, the system will bend itself into knots to protect you. When people today talk about the Epstein Files, They are referring to an enormous trove of evidence. Flight manifests from Epstein's Boeing 727, dubbed the Lolita Express, hundreds of hours of video recorded inside his homes, his infamous Black Book of Contacts, and financial records that could document years of transactions. Some names have been publicly linked to Epstein through flight logs and depositions, including Bill Clinton, who flew with Epstein at least 26 times, sometimes without Secret Service. Prince Andrew, who was accused in a civil suit by Virginia Giuffre of abusing her as a teenager, Alan Dershowitz, who was accused and later settled litigation, and Bill Gates, who admitted to multiple meetings with Epstein even after Epstein's first conviction. The New York Times, Vanity Fair, and Southern District of New York filings have all documented these associations. But what remains hidden is a much longer list of individuals, politicians, financiers, celebrities, tech billionaires, whose names have never been confirmed. According to prosecutors, the evidence seized could fill entire filing cabinets. And yet, the public is expected to simply accept that we can't see any of it. This isn't nuclear launch codes. It is evidence of systemic child exploitation, and the refusal to release it should outrage anyone with a conscience. After Epstein's death in federal custody in August 2019, under circumstances so suspicious that even the coroner's report has been publicly questioned, politicians lined up to promise transparency. Attorney General William Barr swore the investigation would continue. When Ghislaine Maxwell was finally convicted, the Department of Justice said it was reviewing materials for potential disclosure. And then, in February 2025, Pam Bondi, Trump's new Attorney General, told Fox News that she had the client list sitting on her desk, ready to release. This moment should have been the culmination of years of promises. Congress finally had the opportunity to vote on an amendment offered by Representative Ro Khanna, requiring the DOJ to release all Epstein-related records. This was exactly what Republicans had been demanding. Donald Trump Jr. had tweeted, "Show us all the Epstein client list right now. Why would anyone protect those scumbags?" Kash Patel said under oath that he would do everything in his power to make sure the public saw the truth. But when the amendment came up for a vote, nearly every Republican who spent years grandstanding against the cover-up voted no. I watched the video of that vote in disbelief. As the clerk called the roll, name after name lined up to protect the secrets they had so loudly condemned. It is hard to describe the disgust I felt, not because I'm shocked. At this point, no one should be surprised, but because it is still galling to watch hypocrisy carried out so brazenly. They looked the American public in the eye for years and said they cared about these victims. And then they threw up procedural walls to bury the evidence all over again. Why would they do this? The answer is as simple as it is horrifying. Too many people stand to lose everything if those records ever see daylight. Epstein wasn't just a predator. He was a collector of leverage. He moved tens of millions of dollars in donations to prestigious universities and think tanks. He carefully cultivated relationships with influential people across industries. His homes were rumored to be wiretapped from floor to ceiling. Prosecutors recovered more than 50 CDs labeled by date and location, and there were documented efforts to intimidate or pay off witnesses. In the end, the reason this story keeps getting buried is that the tentacles of Epstein's operations reach into every institution that claims to be above reproach. Some people will say this is conspiracy thinking, but you don't need to speculate. Just read the court documents. Read the reporting from the Miami Herald, the New York Times, Vanity Fair, the SDNY filings. Read the deposition transcripts of the survivors. The evidence is there. What's missing is the will to confront it. I want to believe there is still a path to accountability. Civil litigation is ongoing, and discovery could eventually force more documents into the public domain. Independent journalists are still digging. Whistleblowers could emerge. But none of it will happen without sustained public pressure. The political establishment has shown they will not act unless the cost of inaction exceeds the cost of exposure. It is easy to feel powerless in the face of such depravity, but ultimately, the choice remains stark. You can stand with the illusions of respectability and let child predators hide behind closed doors. Or you can stand with the victims, but you cannot do both. Every time a politician tells you to move on, remember that there are still survivors living with what happened to them. Remember that the evidence exists, sealed in federal custody, waiting to be released. Remember that the people who promised to do it have now revealed who they truly are. If you're watching this unfold and feel disgust, you should. If you feel rage, you should. If you feel betrayed, you are not alone. Because this isn't about partisanship. It's about whether the most powerful people on earth will ever be held accountable for crimes against the most powerless. I refuse to pretend that it's acceptable to bury these files in the name of respectability politics. I refuse to pretend that those in power don't already know who's on that list. And I refuse to pretend that it's normal for a government to shield evidence of systemic child exploitation. If Donald Trump wanted those files released, they would be released. If Congress wanted them released, they would be. Instead, they made their choice in broad daylight. Now the rest of us must decide which side we want to be on. And not to sway your conscience, but I hope truly it is not the side of the pedophile.